Okay, everybody, it's exactly 6 p.m. So I will get going now, and hopefully this is streaming both to YouTube and to Facebook as a bit of a novel multi-streaming experience. What could go wrong, right? Well, we'll just see about that. I thought tonight would be something different because mostly I've been streaming about the border closure, and actually tonight, although I'm happy to take questions on the border, it's not specifically about the border because I went live last night around the border at quite some length. No, not last night, sorry, Wednesday night. What I wanted to talk to you about tonight are things like the changes, principally the changes that are coming in on the 27th, and some issues around extensions of visas, and also some of the skilled migrant category questions. So tonight's really more about sort of work and residence for people here onshore, but it may well be of interest to people who are offshore as well. I can see Yako from in my YouTube, so I know you're out there. Lovely to see you tonight, everybody. Okay, so just to set the scene, I mean, obviously there is just so much going on in the immigration space at the moment, and rarely a day goes by when there's not something in the news. Of course, the big news this week was the dismissal of our Immigration Minister, Ian Leese-Galloway. I'm sure everybody is aware of that and the circumstances in which he was dismissed. I think it's a real pity that those circumstances really eclipsed everything else, because from the coalface of immigration advisory work, I would pass on that, you know, I mean, every minister obviously that comes into the immigration portfolio has come at it without really much background in immigration. And to that extent, I always have quite a lot of empathy for our immigration ministers, because they get plunged into one of the most important portfolios in the country. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that immigration in New Zealand, particularly New Zealand being a country right at the bottom of the planet, very heavily reliant on immigration throughout its history, that is one of our most important portfolios. So for people coming in, you know, cold, without that background, it's never going to be easy. And therefore, the success of the portfolio really does depend on the enthusiasm of that individual to engage with the issues openly and, you know, as I say, very actively. And one of the things that I know about, because I've been in this industry a very long time, and I have spent a lot of time with our industry body, which is the NZAMI. I was on the board, and I've worked in consultancy capacities for some years. I have therefore had experience of quite a few immigration ministers over the time, and I've noticed that some are absolutely more willing to engage than others. I mean, if I was going to go into the role, the first thing that I would do is I would obviously find out from the immigration officials what's going on, but I would also consult with the industry, and I would actively want to find out what are the pain points, what do people think about it. I would be engaging with business that relies on immigration and so on. Now, with Ian Leese-Galloway, that was definitely lacking. He was a very reluctant minister, and that's why I think people perceive the last coming up 3 years as something of a disaster in immigration terms, because we've really had a very bleak time of it. There's been a lot of dysfunction, and combined with a real lack of willingness to engage. So that combination is something that we don't really want to see repeated. Now, Chris Farfoy comes in as someone who has already held the portfolio before, so he isn't new to it, and that's a good thing, I think, because he'll have some backing. But do I think anything is majorly going to change? No, I don't, because I think immigration at the moment is obviously driven by a broader government policy. The only thing I'm hoping is that Chris will engage more with industry and be a less frustrating personality to deal with in that regard. So let's see. certainly we will treat it as an opportunity to reopen the conversation, if you like, because there are some pretty dreadful things going on. But okay, so that's a sort of, more political overtoned opening to the whole thing. Let's crack into some of the changes that are going on at the moment. Okay, so before I come to the 27th changes, which are just looming up for Monday, I'm going to talk about those extensions to visas, which were announced a couple of weeks back. And I guess there's been so many questions, and I know there have already been some live feeds by other people, so I will try to be very to the point and to take any questions on it. But ultimately, the extensions boil down to this. If you are onshore in New Zealand and you have a visa that is expiring between now and the end of the year, you are going to get a 6-month extension on that visa. And that is an automatic extension. You don't have to apply for it. It comes by email, and we've already been getting emails for some of our clients, which we then have to, it's actually a clunky system as per usual, because it sends us to a verification link so that we can see the actual extension date, but that hasn't been working. That link is broken. So there are technological issues, but if you are on a visa expiring between now and the end of this year 2020, just know that you will get a further 6-month extension. Now that may be a second extension. So for lots of people, your visas have already been extended out once to the 25th of September. And one of the things that was confusing in the initial communications from Immigration New Zealand was that they said that this second extension would be for 6 months from the date of your original visa expiry. Now that set us all going, well, what do you mean? What do you mean about the original visa expiry? If your visa expired in April and was extended out to September, are you saying that the visa will only be extended for 6 months from April or from September? So what has come out and has been now clarified in writing is that it will be 6 months from the expiry of your first extension, if indeed you had a first extension. So let's take the example of someone whose visa has been extended already to 25th of September. Your visa will then automatically extend a second time to the 25th of March of next year. So, that's good news for a lot of people. But just to also clarify, it's not all visas that are being extended. So this is pay attention here, because the first visa extensions was literally for anybody. It didn't matter what kind of visa you were on. It could have been visitor, it could have been student, it could have been interim, it could have been work. But now they've narrowed the field. So now the only visas that are actually being extended are the following: essential skills work visas, work to residence work visas. Then we've got some that many of you may not know about, but they're called special and skilled work visas for China, Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam. They're very, very specific types of visas, and those are visas that come under quota systems, and they are to do with free trade agreements. So very few people on those, but those will be auto extended. Also for Japanese interpreters and Thai chefs, similar deal. And then if you are on a work visa that was granted through the Section 61 process and has a named employer on it, that will also auto extend. But what was shocking to everybody is that left out certain other visas. Notably, it leaves out specific purpose visas. So that's a kind of work visa which is given out generally to highly skilled people coming in to do a specific purpose type role. And I guess I can understand the rationale, because those roles are normally time limited, but nonetheless, yeah, there may have been an argument for those extending, but they're not. So, yeah, that would be a minority anyway. The much bigger set of people that have been completely excluded from these extensions are the people on partnership visas or dependent child visas. Those are not auto extending out for a second time. So that means that, yeah, it's very unfortunate because people, when they're in a family group, are in a very difficult position where the dependents are having to pay for new visas, and if the main applicant has only got a shortish extension of 6 months, partner and dependent child visas can only ever go to that end date as well. So in some cases what we're seeing, and it's quite unfair really, is that people are having to pay full fee for their partner and dependent child visas and not getting an awful lot of gain out of that. But that's been very deliberately done. The industry has complained about it, but the policy writers are quite open about it. That's not at the moment going to change. Whether they do anything later on, I don't know. But for the moment, anybody who has a visa, who has a partner or dependent child visa, needs to reapply physically. Equally, if you're on one of those types of work visas that's not been auto extended, I think the biggest group actually of work visa types not auto extended would be the post-study work visa people. So that's also tough, So if there are people who have studied and paid vast fortunes to do so in New Zealand, and after they finish their studies they get these post-study work visas, and whether employer specific or open work visas, they are not auto extending those. And I guess this is because the government's had to balance, I guess, protecting New Zealand jobs versus the other factors in favour of auto extending visas. I personally, if you want my commentary on the auto extension, I think it's a very double-edged sword. I think that it does help. It probably helps Immigration New Zealand more than it helps certain migrants in certain situations. It certainly helps Immigration New Zealand in that, as we know, it's already a very overstretched, undercapacitated organisation. And I think the sheer volume of visa applications that this relieves may give some breathing space to them. But for migrants, it's very double-edged. One of the particular areas that we have been advising around is that in some cases it kind of was tempting to go for the 6-month extension, but for reasons I'm about to explain, there are groups of people, and these are the people not being paid $25.50 per hour. It actually made more sense to pay money and actually physically renew an application, and there are still 2 more days to do that. If having listened in tonight, you find yourself in the category of people I am about to talk about. So that's okay, let's move on to that. So the next topic is about the 27th of July changes to our Essential Skills Work Visa Program. And this is a very important area. It's quite complicated actually. I mean, on the face of it, it's simple. The simple part is to tell you that from Monday, anyone who is paid $25.50 per hour, which is the New Zealand median wage, regardless of the type of job that it is, will be able to qualify potentially for a 3-year visa. So to put that into some kind of context, up until now, we have had low-skilled, mid-skilled, and high-skilled essential skills work visas. So 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. Now, as from Monday, that all changes. We will no longer have 1 year visas. We will only have 6-month visas. So for anybody being paid less than $25.50 per hour, The only visa that you'll be able to get in terms of length will be 6 months. And yeah, that's a whole area that's pretty gnarly. So what we have been saying to people who are, for example, let's say somebody's on $23 an hour or $24 an hour at the moment, and it's not going to go up to $25.50. We've been recommending that they apply now, they get in now, if they have a chance of a 3-year work visa now, because if they wait until Monday and it's assessed, if they've applied on Monday and assessed after, it will be only a 6-month visa, and that's really problematic. So pretty ground shaking in many ways, because up until now, immigration has used a combination of the wage and this thing called the ANSCO to determine skill levels. As from Monday, it's going to be all about this pay rate in terms of determining what length of visa you get and what that then leads to in terms of being able to help support partners and children on other visas. Okay, so it's pretty dramatic. How I can best illustrate this is to give a few examples. And so let's take somebody, for example, who at the moment is a cook. At the moment, a cook who is on, let's say, as long as they're on more than $21.65 per hour and has 3 years experience, that cook can get onto a 3-year work visa. As from Monday, unless that cook is earning $25.50 per hour, they will no longer be able to be on a 3-year work visa. They will be relegated to having a 6-month low-skilled, work visa, and that's going to have so many implications, because it also means that that cook that yesterday could support their partner and children, partner onto a work visa and children on dependent child's student visas, will now be in a completely different position. Very short-term visa. The partner will only get a visitor visa, and the children may get student visas still, but depending on what the overall earnings are going to be. So it's quite a complicated area, as you can begin to tell. It's not just as simple as it might have been sort of put out at first blush. So, there's quite a lot of complications. Let's take someone who is earning $25.50 an hour. So that's something to really think about. What we've been noticing in our practice is that obviously employers who want to retain their workers, their migrant workers who value them, are prepared to put their wage up to $25.50 an hour if they possibly can. We've had quite a rush on that, which is exactly what the government wanted to do. The government wanted to push up the push up wages. It's not a bad thing. But what you need to be aware of also is that, as with everything, there's always a bit of a twist, right? So $25.50 has to be sustainable. So, a small business cannot arbitrarily just say, yes, I'm going to offer you $25.50, unless that makes good business sense, because Immigration New Zealand always has the right to ask about the sustainability of any given role. They also want to make sure that there is some kind of business reason, a justifiable reason for paying someone what they're going to get paid. It can't be seen to be arbitrary. So very often you'll see immigration asking for all the pay records for everybody, to see whether the only person in, if there's 3 people in exactly the same job and suddenly the migrant workers upped to $25.50 and the New Zealand workers are not increased, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or unjustifiable, but it might be one of those things that Immigration New Zealand will question. They'll question it for those two reasons. Is it sustainable, and is it also is it undermining the pay conditions for Kiwis? So these are things that you have to be very, very aware of. It's not just as simple sometimes as saying, yes, I want to up the wage. I always ask the employer the question as to how does that fit with the overall scheme? Is it actually going to be financially sustainable? If so, then I don't see a problem. And it's not that everybody has to be on the same wage. I mean, you can, as a business, obviously have three different people working in similar positions, but if one is performing better than the other, if one has more experience than the other, well, okay, so then that's perfectly justifiable in my book. One of the other things to be aware of is that if you are on the $25-50 an hour and you want to get a visa, this ANSCO that everybody talks about, this if I can help you visualize the ANSCO as a book, it's about that fat. We all look at it online, but it's a very big tome. It was actually a piece of work led by the Australian Statistics Bureau, but the Statistics New Zealand have clubbed together with Australia to produce this classification of occupations. So it's called the ANSCO because it's the Australia and New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations, and it's been the bane of all of our lives. We'd all like to sort of rip it up because although it pretends to classify all jobs in Australasia, actually there's just so many gaps in it. It's a bit like a Swiss cheese, very holy, and it's very difficult to work with. Many roles don't really fit with the ANSCO, so it's always been a bit like trying to get a square peg in a round hole, as we say. But with so we're all very relieved in many ways that the ANSCO will now disappear in terms of determining whether you get a 6-month or a 3-year visa, because that's one less step, I suppose, an immigration case officer has to go through. But the ANSCO doesn't disappear completely. The ANSCO, for every work visa, the case officer is still going to have to code the job. So they're going to still have to go through that process of matching, well, what are you? And the reason they will do that is because that will help them determine whether you are being paid the right rate, which is what we call the market rate. So let's, for example, say, we know that $25.50 is this minimum threshold, but you're not going to get away with being paid $25.50, for example, if you are, let's say, a business analyst. So Immigration New Zealand will still try to match what exactly your job is as against the ANSCO to then determine what the market rate should be. Should it be more than $25.50? And also, perhaps even more importantly, they're going to still use the ANSCO to determine what kind of advertising should be done for the job. So if, for example, your job is, and there's so many examples I could give, but let's give the one that's very common. You are a duty manager in a restaurant, but you're being paid $25.50. If they feel that your job is a match more to a restaurant manager because you've got quite a lot of managerial responsibility, you're doing things like costings and you've got some staff management duties and you're in charge of inventory, etc. They will then say, okay, that is a skill level where the employer, to prove that there's no Kiwi to do the job, just needs to have advertised with either on Seek or Trade Me, but they don't need to have gone to Work and Income for the advertising, okay? But if they find that that duty manager isn't quite a match with that level, but is a match with a lower level job, typically we find with those jobs they might code them to a supervisory rather than a managerial job. So they would then say, well, actually, this job needs to have gone also to Work and Income. We need to know from Work and Income if there is somebody that could do that job, because that job is still at a low skill level, even though it's now being paid the median wage. So this is the government's way of forcing, it's not that I disagree with it, but this makes sure that better paying jobs, if you like, are put out to people who are unemployed, as well as people who are employed, perhaps looking for jobs through Seek and Trade Me. So it's to cover more bases, I suppose, for those lower skill levels. The ANSCO will also still be used to determine how much work experience or which qualification you need for the particular job. Okay, so already you're seeing that the ANSCO, they've only done away with ANSCO for a certain part of the overall assessment. So we're still very much stuck with ANSCO. So this is quite interesting too, because a duty manager, for example, to meet the ANSCO only needs to have 1 year of work experience, whereas a manager has to have 3 years of experience. So, you know, this is why we have to think so carefully and strategically sometimes about what we're doing, because we have to analyze each and every aspect of a work visa application to work out what is the correct approach, what advertising needs to be done, what is the correct pay rate, what kind of work experience or qualifications does the applicant need to apply for. So for anybody who's thinking that Monday sort of makes things simpler, I would just say think again. It's definitely not simpler. It's just taken one little element of complication out of it, perhaps, and then I think it's replaced it with others. One thing that people often don't realise as well, this is a very little known fact in our immigration instructions for essential skills applicants, is that, and it's difficult to explain this because it's like a layer upon layer of complication. But if I told you, so for example, $25.50 per hour is going to get you a mid-skilled visa, but, and I haven't got my calculator here, so I'll just do it online for you. Let's have a look. You still, on top of that, if you've got children and you want those children to be able to go to school as domestic students, you still have to meet a completely separate threshold of earnings. So I'm just doing a sum for you right live here, which is that, let's say you're earning $25.50 per hour, but your contract says that you are only guaranteed 30 hours, right? That equates to an annual salary of $39,780. Which would not be enough to support your children onto domestic student visas. And the reason for that is because in a completely separate part of our immigration instructions, it says that for anybody who wants to have dependent children on domestic student visas, they have to be meeting a threshold which is just under $44,000 per year. Okay, so we in our office spend our lives on calculators because we have to do multiple calculations around these things. So in the case of somebody on $25.50 per hour, they have got to be working more than 30 guaranteed hours per week to be able to support their children. And I should add also, I don't want people to think that these pay rates are completely static, because the $25.50 is actually median wage, and median wage is quite possibly going to increase. Now, we don't know whether they will increase that this year, well, not they increase it, but will it increase this year with COVID, where we've had lots of wage adjustments? It may be that for this year we don't actually see an increase, but for the last 3 years where we have had remuneration thresholds for different things, they've been indexed always to the median wage, and if the median wage goes up, so does that threshold. And so they also review the threshold for supporting children onto domestic student visas. So for somebody who, for example, is on a low skilled visa moving forward, these awful 6-month visas that we all feel quite bitter about, because 6 months, basically if you're on a 6-month visa, you almost have to start the process as soon as you've finished it to get through the next visa. But anyway, for somebody who, so the change from Monday, I suppose you could say it's positive that at least somebody who is considered to be low skilled will potentially be able to support a child onto a domestic student visa, which they haven't necessarily been able to do before. They've still got to meet that just under 44,000 threshold. So if you're at the low end of the low skilled wage, you've got to work a lot more hours you've got to have a lot more guaranteed hours to be able to support your children. And so these different thresholds add layers and layers of complexity, which, as you can tell, keep us very occupied. So I do think it's an area where everybody needs to have pretty careful advice. Now, the other thing, so about these 6-month visas, by the way, that is something that's been brought in, I guess, it is obviously brought in to protect the New Zealand lower end labour market, because they want to make employers keep on testing whether there is a Kiwi to do that job. So, you can understand it from the government's point of view, but we're going to be stuck with these 6-month low skilled visas right up until the end of 2021. So literally for the next 18 months, if you're in the low skilled arena, you will only be able to get 6-month visas. That's literally anybody under 25-50, 6 months, and then you'll have to renew, and then you have to renew again. And you will also still be subject to stand down periods, which means that if you reach the point where you've had 3 years already on low skilled visas, you would literally have to go up a skill level, or you have to get out of New Zealand for at least 12 months. So that stand down period, there's a minor reprieve through these automatic extensions, which means that some people are getting a bit of a breather there, but it's not for long, because once you've got your extension, then the stand down periods absolutely apply. So yeah, low skilled is going to become a very big battleground, and it will be very difficult for some New Zealand businesses, because like it or lump it, we are in New Zealand pretty reliant on some low skilled jobs. And whilst I love the idea that New Zealanders should be able to take any job that's in the low skilled area as if they're an entry level kind of person, the reality is very different, and particularly in some of the regions, it's actually incredibly difficult for businesses to find people. I mean, farming, dairy farming, no matter how much training is offered out there, and at the moment there are some really big initiatives to try to get Kiwis into dairy farming, there's still skill shortages. Even in hospitality, where you would think at the moment that you would not have any crack at a visa if you are in a lower skilled, lower paid role, that's actually not been lived out. And we in our office have been absolutely fascinated watching how the new labour market is playing out, because for example, the other day we got a visa issued to a senior waitress, a job that you would absolutely imagine, and I myself had advised that there was bound to be a Kiwi that would be suitable for that job, but actually after a really diligent labour market test that involved full advertising, full screening and interviewing of any Kiwi applicant that was vaguely suitable, going to work and income could not provide anybody at all that was suitable or trainable, and the open market didn't provide that. Also, there was, from memory, maybe 1 or 2 candidates worthy of even interview. But I mean, we look at a waiting role and we think anybody can do it, but actually in a restaurant, particularly, where service standards are incredibly important, if the restaurant has a particular service standard that the customers rely on, should the business owner have to drop those standards completely just to be able to take anybody? And should we, I just throw this out there as a question, should we as New Zealanders also expect, for example, myself as the mother of a child who's now coming up 18, about to leave school, should I expect him to feel entitled that he can just literally waltz into a job without showing any willing, without having the soft and hard skills that are needed, or showing sufficient enthusiasm to be trained into that job? Because I think these are the complexities around societal expectations, which very often get swept aside, and people just simply say, oh, well, a migrant's taking that job. Well, that migrant who's working in that waiting role is not taking a Kiwi job, because not one single Kiwi was able to step up and do that job. And I can tell you, in our office, we're very tough on employers. We're renowned for being tough on employers. We want employers to go through the labour market test robustly. That's a position that we take, and we hold steadfastly to that position. And if an employer gets past us, they get past immigration. That's our philosophy. So yes, it's very interesting. I keep a very open mind to the labour market. Anyway, moving on, I'm hoping you still can hear me. Goodness knows, there's many questions coming through. Right, let me come now to skilled migrant category, because I think that's a burning thing that lots of people ringing me. Oh my gosh, my phone and my emails run hot on these things, because what's going on with our skilled migrant category? What's the real deal? And people have been ringing me. Sometimes the rumour mill is just so active. Social media is so active that it's very difficult, I think, for migrants to... In some ways, it's so difficult to pick through all the different bits of information that are coming at you and really know which bits to rely on. And I can just think of several conversations, even in the last couple of days, where I've been basically saying, no, that's not correct. That's incorrect information. Don't rely on anything through the rumour mill, and I feel this panic through the migrant community. People have said to me things like, the skilled migrant category is being scrapped. I won't be able to renew my work visa because I'm only earning $26 an hour, or whatever it is. There's lots of things going on. So let me tell you what I know about the skilled migrant category. And the skilled migrant category is our flagship category historically. So I'm going to give you a bit of a back story here. So what's actually going on with the skilled migrant category is that you could say, so we've got to separate out people who've already applied for residence and are just sitting in queues. Okay, and I'll talk about those queues, as against people who are trying to apply for the very first time now. And so I'm going to sort of talk about those separately to try to keep this clear. So if you are somebody who has already applied for residence, you've got that residence in other words, the full application has gone in with all your paperwork, and you're wondering what on earth is taking so long, where is it, what's going on? And daily we get people saying, my application's been in the queue for such a long time, where's it going, what's happening, is it there? Okay, so it's reasonably simple to explain. Prior to about March of last year, we really didn't have skilled migrant applications. Certainly in my office, we didn't have any that were taking more than 6 months. Most of them were taking 4 to 5 months from the time we lodged to the time of getting a decision. And so that had become our norm. And then around about March of last year, we began to see that it was all slowing. And it was slowing and it was slowing, and we could feel it. We could feel it, but no communications were coming from Immigration New Zealand at all. Nothing. And I remember I emailed a manager at that point, and I said, what's going on? Nothing seems to be being even allocated out. I don't understand. Why are they not being allocated out? And got a bit of a runaround, and eventually there it came. There came the email saying, well, what we're doing is we've decided we're going to prioritize certain applications, but not others. So what applications are you prioritizing? Oh, well, we're going to prioritize the ones that are earning, a lot, twice median wage, which right now equates to 106,000. It was a bit less this time last year, but anyway, 106,080. That's the golden figure. 106,080. It's a lot of money. The other ones that we are going to prioritize, they said, are people who are working for accredited employers. Great. Okay. And the other ones will be all the people who are in registered occupations. Now, in case you don't know, there is a list of registered occupations. If I'm clever, I'll actually be able to pull that up for you, but maybe I'm not that clever to speak and do that at the same time. I'll see if I can manage it. No, it's going to take me a bit. Okay, hang on. I actually probably can. But the reason I wanted to pull it up for you at all is because it's actually quite surprising. I'm going to do it. I'm going to push the boat out and try and show you this. Okay, let's have a little looky. Where's the right thing? Right. Sorry, bear with me. Screen share. Okay, hang on a sec. Wish I could say I'd prepared this all earlier. I just didn't get time. I had all the intention. Anyway, let's see. Brilliant. Except it's not quite. Oh, this is a different one. Right, okay, I'm going to get you to these instructions. Bear with me. Right, here we are. This is the list of registered occupations, and the reason why I think it's surprising to people. Oh, I seem to have two screens. Okay, if you have a look at that, the most of it will be what you expect, but some of it may not be. I mean, we absolutely would expect all of our health and teachers and so forth to be on there. What I think some people find surprising, have a look at that real estate agent, that's on there. So for example, anybody who's on this list can get priority processing in the skilled migrant residence applications. And yeah, so a real estate agent, for example, will speed through the system. What's, I think, completely unfair and why I so disagree with this is because it's random. Engineers. The only engineer that's on there is an electrical engineer, but a civil engineer, not on there. So let's suppose you're a civil engineer and you are earning $105,000. You are not priority. But if you are a real estate agent and you are earning $55,000 a year, you're priority. That's how they're doing the priority queue. Now, Immigration New Zealand would say to me, oh, well, look, Katie, you're giving examples as usual of outliers. Most of it's very fair. It's your doctors, it's your nurses, it's your this, it's your that. But the problem has become worse and worse the longer the queue has gone on and the more disparities between the queue processing. Okay, so if the gap between priority and non-priority was not so great, I could probably let go these anomalies here. But since last year, we started to notice the non-priority queue getting worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point of almost distraction, because literally, and I think you will have seen it in the news very recently, the queue moved by about 11 days in as many months, meaning that if you were in the slow queue, and you applied for your residence in December 2018, they were literally dishing out these applications at snail's pace. And 2 weeks ago, I saw the first movement of a case that was lodged on the 18th of December 2018 by our office. So that applicant has been waiting for 19 months to get to a case officer. And I think that is a very serious very serious delay, and one that we were never told about at the time. And then as the queue management progressed, what we then also realised, I'll come off that page because I don't think you need to be on there, was by the end of the year it was getting worse and worse and worse. I went to a seminar up in Auckland around about September of last year. That's one of my roles. I train other immigration advisors, and I was at this big meeting with immigration managers and said, gosh, this queue just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's when I was told, yes, actually, sorry, we haven't allocated anything out from December 2018. We're still stuck there. And we've got, at that time, they said 8,000 applications in the queue. Well, okay. This was then the start of a whole new dawning, if you like, of just how bad everything was getting, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And in February of this year, immigration instructions were actually certified by Ian Lee Scalloway to officially put in place these 2 priority queues that they'd already been working with without instructions for all of last year. And that's something that still is a bugbear of mine, because if on the one hand, all of last year when we were saying, how come you are creating these queues, you don't actually have any instructions that say that. There's nothing transparent going on. And we were being told, well, we don't need that. We're allowed to prioritize whatever it is that we want to prioritize. So I then asked the question, if you didn't need instructions on that, why did you make instructions on that in February? Right? And this is a bit like the Avatar thing. They said we brought in the Avatar film crew, and then we said, well, how come you managed to do that? And then suddenly they wrote some instructions that sort of were very tailored retroactively towards the Avatar film crew. And this is what goes on with immigration. So there's an awful lot about our lovely little immigration system, squeaky clean in New Zealand, that's not terribly transparent, I'm afraid to say. But okay, from February of this year, those queues were what we already knew. If you're earning 106,080 or in a registered occupation, fast track. If you're not, you're slow track. What had changed, and actually it had changed somewhere in between all of this, was that the ones who are with accredited employers are no longer getting priority unless you also happen to be earning 106,080 or you're in a registered occupation. So that was a third set of criteria that used to get you into the priority queue, that after about November last year, suddenly that all stopped again. So you could be, let's say you're in a priority, you're working for an accredited employer, but you're earning maybe 80,000. Unless you're in a registered occupation, that's not going to get you anywhere. So we're left at the current time with the fact that we've got this fast queue. The fast queue, to give you an idea of numbers, has about 600 or 700 in it at the moment, we're told. So, I mean, how reliable those stats are, because those are stats that have been given to us rather patchily by Immigration New Zealand. But around 600 or 700 are believed to be in the priority queue, and that queue is taking only about 3 to 4 months to get to a case officer. And just to further give you further insight, between February and now, also Immigration New Zealand decided, and I think this is I think this is since COVID, to have almost another layer of priority that has not been transparent. We were never told about it. We found out about it by sheer experience and observation, and that is there is now I'm going to call it the Uber priority. The Uber priority, that is your teachers. So if you're a teacher, you're in the priority, but then you're plucked out even of the priority to this super priority status, and you get your residence within pretty much a month at the moment if you're a teacher. I mean, it's fantastic news for the teachers, don't get me wrong. But so a teacher will take maybe a month. A health caregiver. We know that our health caregivers, we got thousands of them in New Zealand working in our rest homes during COVID, had the red carpet rolled out in many respects because suddenly we valued caregivers. But a caregiver's going to wait at the moment for a case officer that maybe 19 months or more. What's being done about that? Well, okay, before his rather dramatic demise, Ian Leese-Galloway did actually say that publicly in an interview that he didn't think a 19-month queue was good enough. He wanted to see that brought down to within a year. Now, for me, either he was not being straight or Immigration New Zealand is not being straight, because Immigration New Zealand says the reason we've got this very slow queue is because we don't actually have a residence program in this country at the moment. Which is true. That bit's true. There is no official... Our residence program, which is the bit in instructions that tells us how many places are going to be given out under the residence categories over an 18-month period, that ran out last December. So you could say that since December of last year, Immigration New Zealand have effectively been operating in a vacuum. They don't have any places technically to give out. So what they've done is they've said, well, okay, since the government hasn't given us a new residence target, we'll just use the old residence targets and we'll kind of roll them over de facto, even though we don't really have any in writing. So, okay, we'll do the best that we can. So they've been saying, well, that's why we've got this slow queue. It's nothing to do with capacity. It's just we don't have enough places to give out. We've got too many people in a queue. We're oversubscribed. Therefore, we've got to slow everything down. And there was Ian Leese-Galloway saying, no, I don't think it's satisfactory. I think they should be going faster. So who's right? Who's wrong? Well, of course, one of the key players in that discussion has now lost his job. So we may never know. But it is a highly unsatisfactory situation to be in, and we know how terrible it is for you guys if you're in it, and it's terrible for us as well, not least because we were the ones that lodged some of these applications in completely good faith, believing that we were going to get equality of processing, and that immigration would adhere to the processing times that were then on the website. And it's not happening, and there's been a lot of protest about this. So I think the pressure after the election will be for the government to clear this out. I think I only gave you the figure for those currently in the fast queue, the 600 or 700. In the slow queue, there are 13,000 applications sitting there, roughly. And that's applications. So each application might have... It might be a family of 2 or a family of 4 or a family of 6. So the number of people is a lot greater. So you could say that sitting in that queue right now, there are enough people to keep us going probably for the next year. So if you are in that queue, so there's a few things I want to say about it, because obviously if you're in the slow queue, but you can get yourself into a fast track situation, then I would always encourage you to do that. So we've been working with clients who, when we lodged their application, may have been on a salary that was below the 106,080, but now they get promoted up. And if they're promoted up, we would absolutely put them in, we would then contact immigration and let them know that they now deserve to be fast-tracked. If we had somebody who was in unregistered status but becomes registered, we would absolutely want them to be fast-tracked. Look at this, guys, with your trades. You know, I showed you that list earlier. Well, you know, a plumber is on there. We've got a whole load of plumbers, for example, in New Zealand on work visas who don't have registration. They are working under exemption certificates. If you want to be fast-tracked as a plumber, it's possible that Immigration New Zealand would be inconsistent on this and might treat you as registered being exempt, but unlikely. You're in a much safer position to be fast-tracked if you've gone and got registered. To get registered, that means working through skills, getting your qualification and work experience assessed, and actually getting onto your own registered ticket with the Plumbers Board. That's just one example. So we again, I mean, just to emphasize the point of what we do, and people often say, why are immigration advisors worth their weight? You know, I know that that's a debate out there, but you know, we don't just sit on our bums. I don't know what people think sometimes. I think people think sometimes we just fill forms and do a few bits in this. We are deeply analytical, highly strategically driven, and we help people really navigate the system. And if we see any opportunity for people, such as, moving into a registered profession, then, you know, and it's completely possible to do that. It's completely possible to start the skilled migrant process as X and then swap out for Y, as long as Y meets the criteria. You can swap out a job in a skilled migrant category application as many times as you like, as long as it actually meets requirements. So these are all things that you can be thinking about, particularly for caregivers, for, you know, health caregivers. We're also, if you start the application as a health caregiver, but you do actually qualify in the meantime as a registered nurse and can get a job as a registered nurse, you would immediately move into the fast track profile, for example. If you start out life as let's say you're an office manager, but you then manage to get yourself licensed and registered as a real estate agent, and you can swap your job out as a real estate agent, well, hello, you could go into the fast track. So there are lots of ways to skin the cat. If you are simply unable to do that and you have to sit in the slow queue, then there are things that you need to do to protect yourself for your renewal of work visas, because one of the abject things about this queue is that you are only allowed to renew a work visa when you are in a skilled migrant application, unless your employer re-advertises your job or unless you meet a shortage list. The only way to renew your work visa application is for a year, and then you get another 6 months possibility at the end of that. So what we're seeing is that the queue is taking longer than the work visa renewal that are allowed under special instructions for people in skilled migrant, because when they wrote those instructions, the queue wasn't taking as long. So I know that one of the things immigration's looking at is is reviewing by how much they can extend work visas. But what I'd much rather they did is just clear out the queue. Just get on and clear out this queue. This queue is miserable. It's causing suffering. It's keeping people, you know, this government talks about people not being exploited, wanting to cut out all possibilities for exploitation. But the things, I mean, I have to say, I'm going to call it, I find that some of the ways in which migrants are being treated by the government at the moment are some of the most exploitative elements of the entire system, and keeping people hanging on and hanging on and hanging on in a heightened state of stress around residence is really very unfair in my view. And it means families are having to pay a very large amount of money to renew work visas whilst they're in these queues because their work visas run out, and that's not fair. It's also having a very big impact on teenage children, or the specifically those early 20s children. When you've got a family who are in a skilled migrant application waiting for a year and a half or more to get residence, you know, we know that you can include children up until the age of 25 as dependents, potential if they're single, if they don't have children of their own, and if they're financially dependent. But I'm working with families who've got children in that sort of 23, and that child is therefore having a very prolonged experience on visitor visas, for example, or student visas where they have to pay international fees. They're not allowed if they can't afford international student fees. These families are having to just have their kids on visitor visas, hanging around, unable to do anything, which I don't think is conducive whatsoever. So I'll finish my critique of, or I mean, I don't know if it's helpful, but anyway, my critique of the skilled migrant situation by also saying, because this comes up a lot, people often ask me, is there a way to speed up my application? I'm in the slow queue, but can I speed it up? Is there any mechanism for doing that? And the answer is there is, but it, again, a bit like other aspects of what's going on, it's like jumping the 8-meter high bar. We do have this, we have basically an email address that we're allowed to use to make out a case as to why somebody should be expedited. And anecdotally, we're told less than 10% of requests will actually be successful under that criteria. And I have made some requests myself very, very sparingly. And my experience is that exactly as would be anticipated, is it's extremely difficult to get any expedition whatsoever. The mere fact of having, for example, those 20-odd-year-old children that need to get into education or, you know, get on with their lives, that is not seen as sufficiently exceptional because it's too common. I can't even give you an example of one that's worked because certainly we haven't had that. By the same token, and this is extremely distressing not just to you but to us, is that occasionally on social media someone will pop up with I just got my residence and I applied in July 2019, and we all jump up and down. Well, were you fast tracked? Did you apply for expedition? No, they just literally were an anomaly. And I can say, hand on heart, that in my office we've had anomalies. I mean, I got a case. I can remember a case only recently that was signed off that was we hadn't lodged until well after Christmas last year, and that for no apparent reason whatsoever happened to get allocated out before ones that were lodged in December 2018. It's not fair, it's not right, but this is very typical of the immigration system, that you are always going to have anomalies. Those anomalies, they're not, let me tell you, they're not reflective of anything other than that. I mean, people rack their brains going, what did they do? What can I do? Did they do something better? Did they do... Sorry to say, it's pretty random. It's pretty random. Immigration is very prone to inconsistency and these kind of arbitrary happenings. And of course, the people that it's all good for the people who get that. You know, nobody wants to dampen the success of someone who gets their residence before somebody else, but it's really not. There's often no rhyme nor reason. So don't go wondering what you're doing wrong if you're still sitting in the slow queue. It simply is the way it is. Now, I've been going away quite a while, so I'm just going to also alert some of you to a change a couple of other quick changes. So, if you are, how can I explain this easily? There are a few occupations which are being added to something that we call Appendix 7. Appendix 7 was created towards the end of last year. I think it was October. And Appendix 7 is a list of occupations that previously couldn't get residence. This is the way to keep it simple. They were jobs that had never been able to get residence, and suddenly, from October last year, they came onto this listing and they could get residence, provided they were paid $25.50 per hour, the median wage. And that was a great thing. That absolutely amazing thing. I'm going to show you Appendix 7 right now. Hold on. I'll show you what it is. And I'll tell you, right, hold on. Here we go. There we are. Look at this, people. This is an amazing appendix. I'll just scroll down for you, but you know, there's a whole load of occupations there, from childcare worker at the top. Load of jobs here. Industrial spray painter, sewing machinist. Some of these are very dear to my heart because I have been dealing with some of these. It goes all the way down to insurance loss adjuster. Now, this appendix, and if you look at the bottom date, effective 30th of the 10th, 2019, so that's actually the date it came in, 30th of October, 2019. Prior to that, if I said to you, for example, oh look, bookkeeper, let's take bookkeeper. A bookkeeper prior to the 30th of October last year could not get their residence under the skilled migrant category unless they were earning $38.25 an hour. But when this appendix came in, it was a game changer because it said that you could now apply for residence on that job if earning $25.50 an hour. So that literally brought thousands of people that previously couldn't qualify for skilled migrant residence able to do so. And a lot of it's very surprising. I mean, bank worker. Let's go back up. Teacher's aide. I mean, none of us ever imagined in a million years that this would happen, and we weren't given any warning, by the way. This just happened. It took us all by surprise. And you know, there are actually teacher's aides that now are getting $25.50 an hour. Not many. Most get below, but it is possible with pay settlements and so forth. And the one that I think was the biggest game changer was this one, personal care assistant, because this came on. I mean, these are all our caregivers that previously hadn't had a chance to get their residence, now could get residence. And I love this because for years I'd stood up arguing that really, why were we not letting our caregivers get residence? Well, now they could, provided they were earning $25.50, which is not all caregivers. But a change that is coming, it's not yet in the immigration instructions, but it's coming, is that we're going to have a few more occupations added to that. And I won't go into bike mechanic's one of them. A rigger is another one. Anyway, nurse support worker. There's about 4 roles that are coming onto that list, so that's something. And there is a very particular feature about this, what's coming on the list, that will affect some of our personal caregivers in a very positive way. So if you're in that, I won't go into it now, but I'll just park that. If you're in the personal caregiving space, know that there's a good change coming also to this appendix. The last change that I'm going to alert, well, maybe it's not the last thing, but near to last thing that I'll talk about tonight, is that we don't have a date yet, but by the end of the year, we know that there are going to be changes to the ANSCO. This ANSCO that I've talked about, the big book. It's called, we're working at the moment with a version called 1.2. And by the end of the year, we'll have a version called 1.3. And you might think, oh, God, you know, whatever. But there are some quite important things that go with that change. And I think the most affected group that I can think of, if you're out there tonight, will be people who are currently working in chef or cook roles. Chef or cook, where you don't have any menu planning responsibilities, or staff management, or you're not in charge of ordering, or you're not involved in ordering of supplies. So if you're in that kind of arena, the reason why the change will be so major is that cooks are currently able to get residence as long as the pay rate's there, which chefs and cooks can get residence regardless. It's all about the pay rate rather than whether you get menu planning responsibilities and everything else. But after they make this change, once we get the ANSCO 1.3, if you are considered to be a match with a cook, doesn't matter if chef's in your title, because titles don't really go for anything, it's what's in your job description. If you're downgraded to a cook, you will no longer be able to get your skilled migrant residence, and that's going to be that's going to affect a whole lot of chefs in this country, migrant chefs. And so if you are a migrant chef, can I just please urge you to get some really good advice between now and the end of the year, because there is a way to salvage that, but it involves meeting the shortage list. And I'm not going to go into it in any great detail, because there'll be lots of people here that aren't chefs or cooks and aren't interested. But if you're a chef or a cook, you jolly well need to get some good advice between now and the end of the year, because there may still be an opportunity to get a qualification that you're lacking that would salvage your entire situation. So we do a very large number of hospitality cases in my office. We work for some large hospitality groups. We're very experienced in that area, so please, I urge you to get advice if you are in that, because that's going to be a game changer. No date yet. Okay, I think it's time, if I may, to scan through these questions and let me see what I can find, if there's anything, whether I can pull it up. Right. Okay. Here's a question from Arturo. Is there movement on the waiting list per country of departure for arranging potential flights? Okay, so that's to do with the border. Movement on waiting lists. Now, all I know is that yesterday there was a really important briefing, which is actually on our Facebook page, the link, because I thought it was such an important one. That's Megan Woods and Commodore Digby Webb talking about the border closure, the quarantine managed isolation system, and the fact that they've now got, they're ready to reopen the border. Sorry, that's probably a misnomer. They're ready to reopen to accept some flights in, because they were suspended for a period of time just to get our act together. So they're now ready to go again. I do know of people who are flying in, for example, on Tuesday. So the flights are happening. But Arturo, I can't answer, because we just don't have that level of detail about whether there are per country lists. All I know is that they're going to have a system where they will match the bums on seats on a plane to the number of quarantine beds available, which has not been happening to date automatically. It was all a bit of a wing and a prayer, it seems, as to how that system managed. But from now on, there will be 6,900 quarantine beds, and they literally won't allow a flight to accept more people than they can cope with logically. Who knew that was not happening from the start? Now, Arturo, Again, is the government going to allow migrants to have access to safe travel currently exclusive to residents and citizens? Again, can't answer that. I know that people who've got exceptions have been registering on safe travel, but it's hit and miss. I don't think there's any clear guidance on that yet. Peter, hi. Peter, hi Katie, have you heard of any updates? So I didn't want today to be about the border, and not because, I mean, you know how passionate I am about the border, and I will do separate updates. I will take the question though, but I'm going to do a separate thing as well, probably next week, around partnership exceptions, because that's something that's really troublesome at the moment, and I think it needs its own topic. But Peter, I know it is too big of a question to answer quickly. I mean, at the moment there's no updates other than the fact that you've still just got to navigate the border exception process. So we had a major change on June 18th, and that's the change that we're dealing with. That change brought in a whole new set of problems. It didn't fix the problem that they were trying to fix, which was to say we don't want people flying offshore to fetch their partners, but that's still happening, and it's crazy, and it needs to stop. In terms of processing of the visas, which I think is what you're asking, then I can tell you that yesterday I did have a discussion with INZ top management in the partnership branch, which is just around the corner from my office, and they are precisely at the moment having a discussion about whether and when and how to start firing up again on partnership offshore applications, which are currently all sitting in a holding pattern. There are 1,600 of them at the moment, okay, and those are all partners of Kiwis, and they very much are aware that maybe they need to start firing up on those, but they need to have a bit of green light from the government to be able to do that, so that the border can still be safely managed. So that's back to that whole quarantine capacity, and you know, if they process 1,600 visas, that's 1,600 more people, non-Kiwis, who need to come through quarantine. So it's a pull push. But I'll do a separate sesh on that for you, because it's also something that constantly is evolving. But you know, I mean, I did manage, Peter, to get an application turned around just the other day where I didn't get. I kind of used. We had a visa in the system, but we also had a border exception situation, and sort of needed to fuse them together. So they didn't actually decide the application, but that team helped me get the border exception. But the thing about that is it had some particular characteristics to the case that made that possible, and it's very case by case. Question here about, again, it's all about offshore. Okay, any update or good news about migrant workers offshore? Not yet. It's something that all my spare time is spent on the border, trying to push for change, collating information, and you need to watch some of my other feeds, because I've gone in. I did one just on Wednesday, but at the moment, there's the only thing I can tell you is I wouldn't expect too much before the election, but we just have to continue working with the exception process that we've got. Arturo, that's about. Yeah, I'm going to move on from the border. Actually, split families? Please ask about split families. Adelia, you know how strongly I feel about all of this and the split families, and I believe that the border closure is really having some very, very perverse results. There are people who need to come back to New Zealand. I totally understand, and I hear you when I hear your frustration, because split families, some are getting in and some are not, and it's not fair. It's not right. Yeah, Laura May, Wednesday was designed to talk about the border. Tonight was meant to be about changes to onshore. So there was a hello from Yako from YouTube, so that I knew that both were working. That's a big learning curve for me to get two live feeds going at the same time. There's a comment. Let's go through. Right, more about partners. Okay, Nick, I mean, this tells me that I really do need to do a separate thing on partnerships for offshore people, because that's just so utterly problematic, I know. Now, let me have a look. Now, this is an interesting question. Kurt asks, where does qualified artisans fall? Okay, it's a bit of a vague question, Kurt. But the answer I think that you're looking for, is with these changes from Monday. So if you were, as of today, tomorrow and Sunday, if you're an artisan, which I'm going to call a tradesman, we call them the tradesmen. If you're a qualified tradesperson earning between $21.68 an hour and $25.50, you still have an opportunity to apply for a 3-year visa. However, from Monday, you don't. You only can apply for that visa if you're earning $25.50 or more. But most qualified artisans, as you would call it, should be earning that. Not all, but you should be able to. You absolutely should be able to command that sort of wage. Jasmeet. Oh, well, I did share the registered jobs earlier. They are in the immigration instructions. I hope you saw that, but you can always go back again and have a look. Wanted me to share the list. Share the link. Okay, after this, I'll see if I can share that link. That might be the way I'll have to do that. An answer to question. A power plant operator. Well, as from Monday, so you're wanting that for residents. Power plant operator. Let's just see if I can get you back there. This would be the way to have a look at the link. This is the link. It's called SM10.5 in our instructions. Here we go. Okay, that's the registered professions, by the way. So the link, oops. Oh no, the link's kind of obscured, isn't it? Okay, I'll have to put the link up separately. Sorry, that's not working. So get out of that. Sorry, come back to the question. Question was, so power plant operator is not a registered profession, to answer that question. So if you were a power plant operator who's earning enough to be in the skilled migrant category, which you'd have to be earning a lot, you'd have to actually be earning $38.25 an hour, you still wouldn't be in the registered occupations. And I don't know of a power plant operator earning 106,080, so I don't think you would get priority processing. Here's one. I'm in the slow queue for SMC, getting 25 an hour. Right. Yeah. Okay, so for the 1-year visa, we haven't seen a change in the instructions so far. So that the instructions would remain that you should be able to renew for 1 year, even with that pay rate, because it comes under its own very specific instruction that's not to do with the change on Monday. So unless there's some other change that we see between now and then. But Sarah, I think obviously you should also get that confirmed before you go for that visa, but I am not aware as of today of a change that would impact on that particular ability, because it's standalone instructions. Oh, thank you. That's a comment. Thank you. Just trying to scan through and see if there's anything else I can answer. Okay. Hang on, scan. This is the next one. Immigration had announced policy that if I get paid over the median income in Otago region, I don't need to advertise. That has not been confirmed to date at all. I should add though, there is one of the things I haven't touched on tonight is that there were a whole raft of instructions that haven't come in yet, that we will be seeing theoretically, but I guess it depends on the elections now. But that's over the whole change, the entire changes to our work instructions, where they're going to do away with a whole load of work visas, create more regional focused immigration, and most importantly, make all employers who want to support work visas get accredited, whereas accreditation at the moment is voluntary. Again, I'm not going to go into that tonight because we don't have instructions on it yet, and I think we need to get instructions before we start speculating. But the Otago thing, haven't seen anything on that. What's this? Any news for occupations on the Litzel? Right, Mia. So Mia, with the Litzel long-term skill shortage list, for people who don't know the jargon, at the moment, all of the shortage lists are still in place, that were in place pre-COVID. They haven't been tampered with. So that's quite good news at the moment, because it means that anybody who meets any of the shortage lists, whether it's the Litzel or the CISL or the regional skill shortage list, so that's, sorry, the CISL's the construction and infrastructure skill shortage list. So we've got all these different shortage lists, but if you meet any of those, you don't need, your employer is deemed not to need to advertise to prove that there's New Zealander. That's why those shortage lists exist. But one of the things, Mia, I will point out, because it just reminds me to do so, is that one of the most common mistakes people acting on their own make is they think they meet the shortage list just because a job's on the shortage list. So I'll take a classic case. Diesel mechanic. Diesel mechanic is on the shortage list. It's actually on the long-term skill shortage list, diesel mechanic. So people who get a job offer as a diesel mechanic think, oh, that's great, I meet the shortage list. Well, no, because it's not enough just to have a job that's on the shortage list. You yourself, the applicant, have to meet the small print that is on the shortage list. So for example, for a diesel mechanic, it says you must have a certain type of level 4 New Zealand qualification or equivalent, plus 3 years post-qualification experience. That's just from memory. I mean, there's many other listings. But, so I have seen people who are diesel mechanics, they think they meet the shortage list, they apply for a shortage list visa, they get declined because they haven't proved that they meet the shortage list. And it's not good enough to just have a qualification from overseas and say I meet the shortage list. You have to go through, the only people that can tell you whether your qualification meets the shortage list is either the NZQA or one of the professional bodies that's listed on the shortage list. So going back to the diesel mechanic, it's actually the NZQA. The NZQA, you have to literally pay money, get your qualification assessed, get it assessed against the shortage list, and only then, if it meets it and you've got the work experience part of the shortage list, add that all together, then you can meet the shortage list. But coming back to your original question, yes, they don't need a labour market test. That's the whole point of those lists. And actually, I see the rest of your question, Mia. Hang on, let's have a look. Oh, doesn't want to show, sorry. Mia's question actually finished off with this list. This category of occupations never really get addressed separately. Emphasis is always on the labour market test requirement. Okay, so hopefully I've answered your question. Please let me know if I haven't, but you're absolutely right. If you meet any of the shortage list requirements, if you absolutely meet them in the way that I have described, then there is no need for labour market testing. Otherwise, that we wouldn't have shortage lists otherwise, because that's the whole point of the shortage list. Yeah. So there we go. Right. Let's have a look. Anything else? Another offshore question. So if you've got a visa that had a first entry date, I mean, okay, I haven't addressed this before. I mean, there's always so much to address, but look, it's been my theory for right from word go with COVID that the first entry date is a condition of a visa. And as such, it should be possible to simply vary that condition. But in the absolute determination of this government and Immigration New Zealand combined to, I think, chop out as many people as possible from being able to come to New Zealand, they have decided to interpret it that a first entry date, if passed, renders the visa completely null and void. And therefore, you no longer have a visa. Your visa effectively has fallen away. And that's the way they are. And choosing to interpret it, I think it's challengeable. But that's if you want to take on the weight of the entire system that's against you on it. The system is saying, no, sorry. The only way that your visa can be honoured is if the immigration minister decides in his discretion to exercise the powers under the Immigration COVID-19 Amendment Act to extend out that date. Because and this is a debate that we've had from the start, because we were all saying, why don't we just fill out variation of conditions applications for people whose first entry dates are coming up for expiry and get those amended, and Immigration New Zealand absolutely refused to do that. So I think the thinking will be that if someone's holding a work visa and had never entered New Zealand based on a job offer, they will one possibility to protect New Zealand jobs is to make you reapply for that job with brand new labour market testing or whatever. But it is a wait and see. I don't know what they're going to do about that, Gillian, but it is a very big problem. We have got a whole cohort of people with expired travel dates. If you are the partner of somebody who is onshore already and your expiry date has passed, you can still apply for a critical purpose visa regardless of whether your expiry date has gone. But you've got to be able to meet the critical purpose criteria, the border exception. So I hope that gives some clarity. It is a complicated area. Please feel free to contact me. What's this one? Okay. Oh, thank you, Ravi. That's good to know. It's good to know. It's good to get feedback. Thank you. Suzelle, can you put in an EOI for residents at the moment? Yes, you can. Thank you. Thank you for asking, because I should have mentioned that. You absolutely can put in an EOI. However, we have not had a pool draw since 18th of March. So that's before we even went into lockdown. They haven't pulled anybody out. So you could say that the EOI pool system is in suspense. We are still submitting EOIs, but they're just going to sit there until Immigration New Zealand fires them up again. I have asked how many people are in that pool, and I'm told there's probably around 3,000, which may, if anything, be low. But yeah, it's fine. You can hit the submit button and submit an EOI. It's just going to sit there. The reason why we're still putting them in is, I mean, the conversation I'm having with my clients is this. You need to be aware that they're not pulling anybody out, that just because you put in an expression of interest and pay $530 doesn't guarantee anything. I mean, if the government wanted to turn around and say, you know what, we're changing all the rules and we're only going to pull out people from now on who've got 180 points, they can do that. they can do that. But hopefully they won't. Hopefully they will fire up again. And they will do that possibly after the election. But it is anybody's guess. Anybody who tells you that they know exactly that there's going to be a firing up of the EOI pool, they are not... that cannot be right, because we as an industry simply don't know. We have not had that confirmed. But what we suspect is that, you know, once they do fire up, they will obviously have this massive amount. I mean, prior to COVID, they were generally pulling between 600 and 750 people out each fortnight. So you can imagine this build up. If they suddenly had to pull out all the 3,000 odd that are sitting there, that would create a very big pile up, log jam for Immigration New Zealand in terms of their workflow. So I keep thinking, well, maybe they'll fire it up, but they'll limit the number that they pull out at any one time, and so on and so forth. So they may then look at the date order in which people file. We just don't know. But one thing I can tell you, if you are already in the pool, because this is a question that's come up, I know you haven't asked it, Suzelle, but it comes up. People say, well, you're only allowed to be in the pool for 6 months. And then it dies. But actually what the instructions say is helpful. The instructions say if you're in the pool and there have been no pool draws, then there is no limit in terms of time. You get 6 months from when they start firing up. But if you're on 160 points, and unless they change the points threshold, you will get pulled out. It's just a question of time. So, you know, as long as people have their eyes open and understand that there is this time delay now, then by all means go ahead and put your submit into the pool draw. But don't expect anything much to happen before the elections at the very, very least. Now, what else have I got here? Offshore, Gillian. Sorry, just scanning down. Some of you are replying to each other, which is lovely to see. Gillian, with your comment there, I do just want to say how much I absolutely hear you and feel for you, because I've got many clients who are in your position. Through the groups that have organised around the border closure, I'm very aware of how many there are who are yet to even start a life. And I don't think the New Zealand public is still fully aware enough of what it means to actually come out to New Zealand to sacrifice. All New Zealanders are being fed and allowed to think that immigration is quite a negative thing and a threat. And I keep saying to people, you know, pre-COVID, even though we had the highest immigration we'd really ever had in the last few years, we also had the lowest unemployment. So go figure. And I personally don't believe immigration is all about purely economic growth and economic good, because I think there are other elements, or social aspects to immigration, the impact of immigration on receiving communities, on departing countries and so forth. It's a very complicated web. But what I think needs to be done is a lot more work around educating both the New Zealand public, but also those in decision-making roles as to the fact that the sacrifice that you've made. Because I know, particularly from certain countries, it can take 1 or 2 or more years to plan to migrate, take selling up of houses, giving up of jobs that you may not ever get back, uprooting children from schools, and and you've done that based around a job offer. And if that job offer is still there for you, I absolutely believe that you should be allowed to come. The problem is that it's a very, very, very significant political football at the moment. Anyway, I do think I've answered everything, hopefully, and if I haven't, please feel free to contact me. I should have put this up in the first place, shouldn't I? This thing here. If you need to get a hold of me or my team, there's our details. We've got a website. You can always contact me. And I'll be doing more updates. I mean, I think the joy of these social media lives is that we can be pretty agile and pretty impromptu, and as things change, we can communicate with you. It's all about communication. It's about helping you through what's a pretty tricky time and making sure that you are fully supported. So by all means, do get in touch. And it's Friday night. I think we all deserve to go and watch New Zealand comedy or whatever it is that you want to do. I wish you all a very, very good weekend, whether you're here onshore or offshore. And the work doesn't stop. It goes on and it goes on. And the border closure, my commitment to that has in no way waned. It only gets stronger actually as each week goes by. So but I will leave you with this as well. I'll be doing a partnership. So for offshore partners who are experiencing the awfulness of the border closure, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to do something around partnership visa applications generally. And I'm also going to do some more intimate sessions around specifics. So for example, things like certain strategies for if you're not eligible for residence now, how to become eligible for residence, and useful topics like that. So a very good night to you all. It's now over and out.